One can be a saint only in a church where it is possible also to be a devil. No crowns of merit rest suspended over those who do not fight. They might all go out to enterprise unheeded and alone. Were there not some great moral issues at stake?
Guys, welcome to the second episode of the Saints of the New Millennium podcast. In this podcast, we'll be talking about abortion, as mentioned before. And yeah, Sean, you want to take it?
Yeah, our last episode did really well. We had a ton of viewers. I was really surprised. We had a few viewers in Puerto Rico, so shout out to Puerto Rico. We see you guys. And I guess it's time to get into it. We're going to be first discussing why the church teaches abortion is wrong. So Nick has his catechism, and he's going to read sections 2270 to 2275 in the catechism on this subject.
You got that. Alright, so what the Catholic Catechism says about abortion, starting with Article 2270, says, human life must be respected and protected absolutely from the moment of conception. From the first moment of his existence, a human being must be recognized as having the rights of a person, among which is the inviolable right of every innocent being to life. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. My frame was not hidden from you, when I was being made in secret, intricately wrought in the depths of the earth. Article 2271 says, since the first century, the Church has affirmed the moral evil of every procured abortion. This teaching is not changed and remains unchangeable. Direct abortion, that is to say, abortion willed either as an end or a means, is gravely contrary to the moral law. You shall not kill the embryo by abortion, and shall not cause the newborn to perish. God, the Lord of life, has entrusted men to the noble mission of safeguarding life, and men must carry it out in a manner worthy of themselves. Life must be protected with the utmost care from the moment of conception. Abortion and infanticide are abominable crimes. Article 2272 says, formal cooperation in an abortion constitutes a grave offense. The Church attaches the canonical penalty of excommunication to this crime against human life. A person who procures a completed abortion incurs excommunication latae sentete by the very commission of the offense, and subject to the conditions provided by canon law. The Church does not thereby intend to restrict the scope of mercy. Therefore, she makes clear the gravity of the crime committed, the irreparable harm done to the innocent who is put to death, as well as to the parents and the whole of society. Article 2273 says, the inalienable right to life of every innocent human individual is a constitutive element of a civil society and its legislation. The inalienable rights of the person must be recognized and respected by civil society and the political authority. These human rights depend neither on single individuals nor on parents, nor do they represent a concession made by society and the state. They belong to human nature and are inherent in the person by virtue of the creative act from which the person took his origin. Among such fundamental rights should one mention in this regard every human being's right to life and physical integrity from the moment of conception until death. The moment of positive law deprives a category of human beings from the prosecution which civil legislation ought to accord them. The state is denying the equality of all before the law. When the state does not place its power at the service of the rights of each citizen, in particular of the more vulnerable, the very foundations of a state based on law are undermined. As a consequence of the respect and protection which must be ensured for the unborn child from the moment of conception, the law must provide appropriate penal sanctions for every deliberate violation of the child's rights. Article 2274 states, since it must be treated from conception as a person, The embryo must be defended in its integrity, cared for, and healed as far as possible, like any other human being. Prenatal diagnosis is morally illicit. If it represents the life and integrity of the embryo, and the human fetus is directed toward its safeguarding or healing as an individual. It is gravely opposed to the moral law when this is done with the thought of possibly inducing an abortion, depending upon the results. Diagnosis must not be the equivalent of a death sentence. And finally, Article 2275 states, one must hold as licit procedures carried out on the human embryo which respect the life and integrity of the embryo and do not involve disproportionate risks for it, but are directed toward the healing, the improvement of its condition of health, or its individual survival. It is immoral to produce human embryos intended for exploitation as disposable biological material. Certain attempts to influence chromosomic or genetic inheritance are not therapeutic, but are aimed at producing human beings selected according to sex or other predetermined qualities. Such manipulations are contrary to the personal dignity of the human being and his integrity and identity, which are unique and unrepeatable. And that is what the Catechism has to say about abortion.
Okay, so we'll probably link down in the description for our YouTube listeners canon law on that so that they can go read what canon law has to say. So what do you guys think about what the Catechism says, how it explains it, etc.?
Personally, I think it goes pretty well in detail, which is a good thing, because there are a lot of cases, like an unbelievable amount of cases made against pro-life. And so the fact that the Catechism lists a whole long sequence of things all enveloped in 6 articles, I think it's a good thing, because it tries and pinpoints it from every single angle, including like elements from other topics that involve embryos and unborn children.
What about you, Jeffrey?
I think it's explained rather well. The one thing that was kind of getting me was the conception till death. I've heard before conception to natural death, so I'm gonna have to look up kind of that kink of it. Other than that, I think it was explained very well. They also threw the IVF kind of standpoint in there, which I think is good because it is connected to the abortion segment.
Yeah, they did throw an IVF there, I think, towards the end. And of course, we'll be covering that and topics related in another episode. I enjoy this section. I think it's really good. I think a lot of the sections of the Catechism are really good. But I like how they go over the law in regards to this. And I like how they go over the right of life. It reminds me of the founding documents of our nation, to be honest. It just sounds like I'm reading a constitution or a Declaration of Independence from defending a fetus, which is nice. And I also like that they include the clarification that the consequence of excommunication is not them trying to restrict God's mercy.
Mm-hmm.
So we all, of course, are familiar with the teaching of the church in this regard. And we know that it's wrong because it is a human person, and human persons have inherent dignity because we're made in the image and likeness of God that has to be protected. So to kill said human or end their life in any way except for in self-defense, but we'll go over that another time, is morally reprehensible. And as the church teaches, is intrinsically evil. This is such a serious topic socially for the church that it's on the list of non-negotiables for Catholics, that we don't change our stance on this, and we are called to defend the right of the unborn. Do you guys have anything else?
Not really.
You broke up midway through, but this is a very important topic, especially that it deals with human life. Yeah, we'll go with that.
Last thing I would want to add in that you cannot be Catholic without being pro-life. You cannot be a pro-choice Catholic. There's no such thing. That would not be a Catholic at all. They would be out of communion with the church in that regard. The church teaches infallibly this doctrine and is against abortion, and their infallible teaching is they say what goes. So if you don't like it, well, one, the science isn't on your side, and we'll discuss that. But two, it's too bad. That's the teaching of the church, and the church is in communion with what God teaches and what he wants. So we've all had personal experiences where we've had to, at least I think, that we've had to defend this teaching, or that we've had to talk about it, or maybe some listeners even knew people that faced this dilemma, or are currently facing this dilemma. Let's talk about our experiences with this for a minute. Nick, do you want to start?
I do. So, personally, I knew a while back, maybe a year ago, I knew I was pro-life. I knew I had made up my mind about that. I was Catholic. I was pro-life. I wanted to fight for unborn children's lives, but I didn't exactly know what it was 100% about. So I didn't really commit to the pro-life movement. Like I didn't really hammer that into my life until I actually went to the March for Life, which is an amazing opportunity if you haven't gone. It's such a wonderful trip. But yeah, because the March for Life, it's people from all over the country that you don't expect that many people. I think last year they had 600,000, maybe even more. They're marching around the Capitol saying that abortion should be illegal and that unborn babies have rights, that they need a right to live. And that really sunk in with me, that many people were willing to stand up against the government and just say that, hey, what we're doing is wrong. It's okay, you can admit it. What we're doing is wrong. We have to change this. And so that reminds me of a quote that St. Pope John Paul II brought up. And his quote is this: "This situation, with its lights and shadows, ought to make us fully aware that when we are facing an enormous and dramatic clash between good and evil, death and life, the culture and death and the culture of life, we find ourselves not only faced with, but necessarily in the midst of this conflict. We're all involved and we all share in it, with the inescapable responsibility of choosing to be unconditionally pro-life." I really love how he says, JP2 says, unconditionally, because really, if we're trying to live how God wants, we don't really have a choice. Like, you have to be pro-life. Because being pro-choice, that's one, that's against God. Two, that's against your fellow people. As a society, you're killing other people. And so I think that those 2 points, and that I think that quote and the March for Life really help sink in like what it means to be pro-life.
Definitely. I really love that quote from I read it, just refreshing my memory on it, and I really like it. Jeffrey, anything with you?
So a big thing that I look at with abortion is, just the experience of life. And when abort that child, it is a living thing, and you essentially, like, you end not it, but you end its potential and its impact on its surroundings. And so you can think about every little thing you've done to please other people. You can think about all the experiences you have had, everything you've laughed at or cried at, all of your emotions. You are basically taking all of those away from a person. Um, it is a mortal sin to abort unborn child, because God did design us before placing us in the womb. So it is like true evil, and it should be illegal. One thing a lot of people, so I have not, can't remember a time I've had to actively give the pro-life argument, but I have had to do the facts versus faith argument. And the thing there is, most of the people who use the Bible to contradict the Bible have all of it wrong. And there's also the fact where, well, where's the proof, Like, faith is one of the 12 fruits of the Holy Spirit, which is the list I really use personally to reflect on my life. And without faith, it's hard to go places in life. And with the Catholic faith, you just cannot be pro-choice and be a Catholic. Because you'll hear of these cafeteria Catholics where they like to pick and choose little parts of Catholicism they agree with. But the non-negotiables are non-negotiable. If you do not agree with that set, you cannot be considered a Catholic.
That is true. In my personal experience, I went to a public school. I know that Nick goes to a private school. I think Jeffrey goes to a private school.
I started in private, now I'm in public.
Okay. Well, I went to a public school, and I have gotten into it many times, but that's probably because I don't keep my mouth shut. It'll get me in trouble someday, more than it already has. But I remember one time, it was right after the Alabama law got passed, and that law is the best. That one of my friends, I guess she didn't understand what it meant that I was Catholic. Like, everybody knows that I'm Catholic at my school that I went to. I'm graduated now, but when I went to my high school, everybody knew I was Catholic. It's hard not to. But I guess she didn't really understand what that meant, because she was complaining about the Alabama law that was just passed on abortion. And she just kind of stopped and looked at me for agreements. And I just went, I think it's great. even the parts about rape and incest. And everybody lost their minds immediately. I remember, I was backed up against the wall by like probably circle around me trying to argue with me about this. And I unfortunately did get stumped on some things, but in the end, of course, I held my belief and said, you know what, I'm Catholic no matter what. I can't change that belief, so I might not have a good response for that one, but I know what the church teaches and I'm going to follow it. I think I did an all right job. I had a friend who ended up jumping in to help me, but later on we disagreed, and it was, I think, in cases of rape and incest, which is hard for a lot of people to understand, and we're going to go over that later. But I definitely have gotten into a lot of debates on this subject, but then again, I've gotten into a lot of debates, period. And I also went to the March for Life. So I remember when I first started learning about my faith, I would go into YouTube comment sections for abortion and stuff, pro-life and stuff, and I would argue with pro-choicers. That was my first exercising of my apologetics knowledge, was in that regard. So I kind of started defending the faith with abortion. And my senior year of high school, because I started in 9th grade, really getting into my faith. My senior year of high school, I went to the March for Life this past January, and that was an incredible experience to see, like Nick said, to see all those people. You turn around when you're on the hill for the Capitol and you can't see the end of them. It's like there isn't an end, and it's incredible. I got to see the Organization for Tradition, Family, and Property, which was awesome. I like them. And two of the things that made the biggest impact, I'd say, was that there was a speaker and she had survived an abortion. She was I guess you would say, a failed abortion. I would say good, because it shouldn't work. I think all abortions should fail. However, she was one of a pair, a sister, and her sister didn't survive, unfortunately. But this was a grown woman. She had her own daughter, and she had her own life. And I got to speak to her one-on-one later on, and it was incredible. I had never thought about the actual children in the womb, the survivors. I always thought about the children that were lost and that impact that abortion has on women and the families. I never thought about the children who may have survived. And so to meet one of those was view broadening. I also, during the march, saw signs of a lot of women and men who were holding up signs saying either that they regretted their abortion or that they regretted their lost fatherhood. And I think those were the most powerful signs out there during that march.
I do have another sign. What I'm holding here, this is I'm not sure if this is an actual picture of an aborted child, but this is a poster of an aborted child, and I really think that this also was one of the things that really impacted me. On it, it says hashtag abortion is ageism, and I really think it is, because you're not giving any fair chance to those who are unborn. And just the graphicness of this poster was very realistic. It shocked me. Imagine seeing that in real life. That would rock your world.
I bet. So go ahead, Jeffrey.
So first, I'd like to shoot off Nicholas, then I'll go to Sean. Abortion is ageism, because when you look at it, you tend to look at ageism as being older people. But it is all over the place. And so you think just because the child hasn't been born yet, they're not a person. But the church does teach from conception. And when you come to the science versus faith battle, where, science actually proves that life starts at conception because that's when the DNA is all made up. And so conception to natural death, and I'm going to have to look at that natural part again in there. So it is ageism. And so you have a bunch of people who are like, oh, I support this, and I don't like, this or this and this, but I'm pro-choice, but I don't support ageism. And yeah, that doesn't work. So being pro-choice is ageism. And then Sean's comment about the meeting a failed abortion is something that I think would really help if people who are considering an abortion met someone who was a failed abortion, because they can see what it is that they are destroying.
Well, actually, that's a really good segment into our next topic, Jeffrey. So we're going to be talking about abortion procedures, and we're going to be talking about the two biggest arguments from pro-choicers. The first one being that it isn't a life. So, of course, the church teaches that life begins at the moment of conception. A lot may not know this. I actually, in my story where my friends were trying to debate me on abortion, I got stumped by this one. Somebody said that it was just a lump of cells, and I wasn't quite sure what to say. But I did more research since then. It's been a while, about, I'd say 2 years. And science shows that the zygote at that moment in conception and the early stages does not behave in the manner that a clump of cells does. So a organization of cells would behave in a certain manner. However, an organism behaves in a different manner. And from the very moment of conception, the zygote is already behaving in the manner of a distinct organism that is separate from the mother and the father, and is certainly not a lump of cells. It's behaving in a manner that sets it apart as a human organism. So it would be classified as a human organism. We don't, so there is a lot of claims that we don't know when life begins, but that's not as true as many would believe. Certainly, you can find embryologists that tend not to say anything, but the vast majority of embryology in the biologist world agree that it begins at conception. You can find evidence of this on websites, and we'll link them down in the description. These websites, studies, just documents. The American College of Pediatricians, a study found that 96% of biologists say that life begins at conception. Princeton, if you go on there, you can find a lot of Princeton EDU, you can find a lot of documents talking about how life begins at conception. The Charlotte Lozier Institute and the Winchester Institute did one on how life begins at conception, and it talks a lot about the difference in behavior from a clump of cells versus an organism and the zygote. So if you want a lot of information on that, go to the Winchester Institute link that we'll provide in the description. So the fact that it doesn't feel pain during the procedure is probably the second biggest point. And of course, we know that it does. You could take an ultrasound from any abortion And a lot of them may not use it. Some of them do use ultrasounds for them. And you can see that the child is in pain. We're going to go through the procedures and how they do. I think Nick is going to pull that up, and then we're going to each read the different trimesters and how the procedures work.
Okay. First thing I'll say is that you cut out in that segment a little. And then
For you?
back to the discussion. Crap, I was gonna say something.
Nick, go ahead and pull up the abortion procedures.
The first one?
Yeah. So, Jeffrey, go ahead and read the first trimester. If you remember what you wanted to say, then go ahead and say it. But for now, just read the procedures.
Okay, so going off of Sean.
Nick, bring it up.
So going off of Sean's, it cannot feel pain. Another thing I'd like to point out is that it is the parent that is giving consent and is ultimately making the decision for the child that results in the child's death, which is kind of like if I just decided that your life would end right now. So it just, when you put it that way, it just doesn't sound cool, because it doesn't. So I think that's also important, that the child doesn't get a say in it.
That's true.
Okay, and so with abortion procedures, the first one is aspiration, and that is performed, it is a suction or aspiration. D&C abortion is performed in clinic. Prior to the abortion, the woman should receive an exam that includes an ultrasound in order to confirm that she is pregnant and diagnose any complicating factors, such as a tubal or ectopic pregnancy. An abortionist uses metal rods or medication to dilate the woman's cervix and gain access to the uterus where the baby resides. An abortionist then inserts a suction catheter to vacuum the child from the womb. The suction machine has a force approximately 10 to 20 times the force of a household vacuum cleaner. The procedure is completed as the abortionist uses a sharp metal device called a curette to empty the remains of the child from the mother's uterus. A follow-up exam and ultrasound can be performed to help minimize the risk of an incomplete abortion. So another thing I'd like to point out real quick is the incomplete abortion. And what you're getting at there is kind of pain topic, where, you know, you back when they used like a thing like, imagine if lethal injection was your death sentence, and so they inject you, but it doesn't work, and it just hurts until it can kill you. So an abortion that doesn't go right could also fall under cruel and unusual punishment. That's how I see it. And so I do think it should be illegal just by looking at that.
I would say in some cases, yes, but that would be under the speculation that the child survived the attempt. many times because of, and in this case, you would have the suction machine that they're using. I don't think the child is surviving it. So it's simply
Mhm.
parts of the child that are left over in the uterus, and those can cause infection. They can cause terrible side effects for the woman. But
Mhm.
yes, in the case that the child did survive and is severely wounded, then of course, cruel and unusual punishment.
Yeah. Okay, and then the short-term and long-term risks and adverse effects. Injury to the uterus or cervix, potentially damaging intestines, bladder, and nearby blood vessels may occur. Other consequences include hemorrhage, infection, and in some cases, the death of the mother. Um, a quick thing to point out there is the mother used in this sentence, where the mother is giving up her motherhood. So I don't know if mother is really the right word to use there. And
I
again,
would
we
say it is.
okay.
Because from the moment of conception, the child has an eternal soul.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
technically, the mother is still a mother. You still retain your motherhood.
yeah.
Now you're just the mother of a dead child instead of a living one.
Okay, yeah. I do get what you're saying there. And again, we can get into the mortal sin aspect of it later. Uh, so an incomplete abortion occurs when parts of the aborted baby are left in the uterus following the abortion. And here it says that approximately 1 out of 63 are incomplete, which you may
For
go,
DNC.
So you may think that it's not a lot, but on a term of how many are done, that is a lot. And then extreme pain, nausea, excessive bleeding, and even death may result from an incomplete DNC abortion. A woman may need surgery to remove the fetal body parts as well as blood transfusions and antibiotics. Long-term DNC abortions have caused complications in future pregnancies. One such complication that it can make it difficult to carry a future pregnancy to term. DNC abortions have been known to cause damage to the uterus or cervix, which can result in very premature births with the next pregnancies. The subsequent scarring to the uterus may increase the risk of uterine rupture during future pregnancy, which may result in death of the baby and even the mother. In addition to an increased risk of preterm birth, damage to the lining of the uterus can also cause additional problems for the woman during future deliveries, including significantly higher risk of hemorrhaging. And a big thing I'd like to point out here is that by aborting the child via this method, you could possibly take away your chance of, if you realize it wasn't the right decision. Like, you cannot revive the child that you've killed, but if you think that you do want to raise the child after murdering one, you can possibly give up that chance by using this procedure. And there are studies that indicate the risk of depression, anxiety, and suicide is greater for a woman who aborts an unwanted pregnancy than it is for a woman who carries an unwanted pregnancy to term. So some people, and I know we'll get into the rape aspect later, think that the child will just remind them of that pregnancy. You will also be reminded of the murder of that child. I know one thing that I can't remember where I heard it, but one person who aborted a child would always think that at this time my child would be graduating high school, would be graduating college, would have a job, and you can kind of dream in a way of what the child could have achieved and become. And so there's just so much to think about because every person is unique and abortion just murder is 100% the right word. And then how developed is the child at this point? So during this stage in pregnancy, the preborn child is developing rapidly. At 4 to 5 weeks LMP, that is 4 to 5 weeks since the first day of the mother's last period, and just 2 to 3 weeks following fertilization or conception, the baby's organs start to develop and the heart begins to beat. These developmental milestones often take place before the mother even knows she is pregnant. So at week 8, the preborn baby's hands and feet are developing and the neural pathways in the baby's brain start to form. The child is constantly moving in the uterus, although the mother cannot feel it. By 9 weeks, the child can suck its thumb, open and close its jaw, stretch, and sigh. The baby's teeth begin to form, and the heart completes dividing into 4 chambers. At week 10, the child's vital organs have developed and start to function. The baby is rapidly moving in the uterus, and tiny nails begin to form on the child's hands and feet. And then at week 12, the child develops reflexes, can open and close fingers, respond to touch, and make movements with his or her mouth. The child's nerve cells are developing rapidly. And so those are kind of the stages which this abortion tends to occur. Any comments?
Well, I think that week 12 has something to do with the not feeling pain. The child's nerve cells are developing rapidly. So, and it responds to touch, which means it could probably feel positive or negative touch. And of course, a giant vacuum cleaner sucking you out of the uterus is not a good touch. So I think that for sure by week 12, it could be said that it can feel pain, if not before that.
I think responding to touch, because pain is really just, pain is a form of touch, if you think about it, because it's all about the nervous system. So week 12, yes, it feels pain, 100%.
And that's still in the first trimester.
I also want to point out for week 9, by 9 weeks, it can suck its thumb, open and close its jaw, stretch and sigh. I think back to what you said on the characteristics of an actual person and the characteristics of a lump of cells. I don't think a lump of cells has any requirements to stretch, sigh, or suck its thumb to say. I think those characteristics are very human, so I think the life is present from conception. And this is proof. Those are human functions, because no just ordinary lump of cells is going to do something that typically is only found as a habit in a human being, a living person.
Definitely. Yes. I think that that's a good point. All right, you want to read pills for us, Jeffrey?
I will read pills. So, in the first trimester, the second treatment is abortion pills. And So, as is performed, the woman visits an abortion clinic or doctor's office and ingests pills containing mifepristone, also known as RU 486, at the clinic. This drug blocks the action of the hormone called progesterone. I probably pronounced that wrong. Which is
Progesterone.
okay, that sounds better. Which is naturally produced by the mother's body to enable the mother to sustain and nourish the pregnancy. When the mifepristone, which I'm also probably pronouncing wrong, blocks the
Mifepristone?
progesterone. Mifepristone?
That's what I would say.
Okay. When that blocks the progesterone, the lining of the mother's uterus breaks down, cutting off blood and nourishment to the baby, who then dies inside the mother's womb. 24 to 48 hours later, the woman ingests another drug called misoprostol, also called Cytotec, administered orally or vaginally, which causes contractions and bleeding to expel the baby from the womb. Any comments?
Nope. Continue
Do you
on.
want to say that
Oh.
in many states, I think all the states, that it is well known that neglect is a crime. And I just want to say that if it says that you're cutting off blood and nourishment to the baby, I think that's a form of early neglect, really, because neglect is denying food, water, shelter, and nourishment to your child. And I think that this is the same case, just in an earlier age.
In a way, you are starving the child to death. Which I don't think many of us would want to be starved to death. So a lot of these treatments, you can look at certain not condition characteristics of what happens to the child, and just kind of think about if that happened to you, with the vacuum that is 10 to 20 times stronger than your household vacuum, and then just being starved to death. So the short-term and long-term risks and adverse effects. In the short term, the RU486, it's kind of hard to mispronounce that, and the misoprostol cause severe cramping, contractions, and heavy bleeding, which force the dead baby out of the mother's uterus. Contractions and bleeding to expel the baby can last from several hours to several days and can be very intense and painful. Many women also experience nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, and headache. Maternal deaths have occurred, most frequently due to infection and undiagnosed ectopic pregnancy. Even after the baby is expelled, the bleeding and spotting may continue for several weeks. Bleeding usually lasts 9 to 16 days. 8% of women, 1 in 12, bleed more than 30 days, and 1% require hospitalization because of the heavy bleeding. And then about 5 to 8% may need a surgical procedure to complete the abortion or stop too much bleeding. So again, the mother is also at risk during an abortion. And then there is insufficient reporting on the long-term effects of medical abortions. Approval for RU 486 in the United States only extends back to October 2000, and long-term effects and risks must still be evaluated. This means that women who undergo medical abortions could be prone to unknown risks. So there are still other things that we don't really know about. And there are studies that indicate the risk of depression, anxiety, and suicide is again greater for a woman who aborts an unwanted pregnancy than that who carries an unwanted pregnancy to term. Any comments
So
on
this
that?
is still the first trimester.
This is still the first trimester, so this only has week 8 and week 9 on it. But the preborn child is still developing rapidly. Again, we pointed out week 9, it's sucking the thumb, it's opening and closing the jaw, and the heart has completely dividing into 4 chambers, and that is 100% a different organism from the mother.
So pills would probably be the first thing they'd resort to if it's that early on. Aspiration, I would say, is probably in week 8 and week 9 would probably be, if they absolutely had to. Past week 9 is probably when they'd use aspiration.
Mm-hmm.
So I have...
Take the second trimester?
That would be me. So the second trimester is called a D&E abortion. It stands for a dilation and evacuation. So it's performed this way. To prepare for a D&E abortion, the abortionist uses laminaria, a form of sterilized seaweed, to open the woman's cervix 24 to 48 hours before the procedure. The laminaria soaks up liquid from the woman's body and expands, widening, dilating the cervix. When the woman returns to the abortion clinic, the abortionist may administer anesthesia and further open the cervix using metal dilators and a speculum. The abortionist inserts a large suction catheter into the uterus and turns it on, emptying the amniotic fluid. After the amniotic fluid is removed, the abortionist uses a Sofer clamp, a grasping instrument with rows of sharp teeth, well, teeth in quotation marks, to grasp and pull the baby's arms and legs, tearing the limbs from the child's body. The abortionist continues to grasp intestines, spine, heart, lungs, and any other limbs or body parts. The most difficult part of the procedure is usually finding, grasping, and crushing the baby's head. After removing pieces of the child's skull, the abortionist uses a curette to scrape the uterus and remove the placenta and any remaining parts of the baby. The abortionist then collects all of the baby's parts and reassembles them to make sure there are 2 arms, 2 legs, and that all the pieces have been removed.
So, if anything, I think that's where Nicholas's poster comes from, with reassembling the parts. And I can't help but think about kind of a collector. I just don't know how you could, be looking down and go, oh, found an arm, found a leg.
Dude, just reading that makes me almost about to cry. Like, how could you possibly do that job? I'm about to cry just thinking about it.
Like, for me, reading that is harder than reading a lot of the other ways that people have been killed. I know last episode we went over Saint Corona, who was tied to 2 palm trees, and when they let go of the palm trees, they split her in half. And that feels like almost nothing compared to reading this, where they are taking limb by limb and then taking intestines and pulling those out, and then just how they use the parallelism in the one sentence, the most difficult part of the procedure is usually finding, grasping, and crushing the baby's head. It hurts to read. And at this point of the procedure, for sure, I would say the child has been killed, just because they've already pulled the spine, the heart, the lungs. But it's this again, you can kind of, like, if you were just, sitting there as someone pulls off your arms and then your legs and then starts taking out your intestines, that has to hurt. So when a lot of people use the pain argument, I think many of them are not aware of the degree of the pain. I guess they kind of think of it as being poked with a needle, I guess. That's the first thing that came to mind. But if you read some of these and just try to close your eyes and visualize them, you can't, like for me, I can't close my eyes and willingly visualize these for a long time. Like after just like 2 seconds, it's like, no, I'm out. This hurts to read. And it most definitely has to hurt more for the child. And again, I don't see how a failed abortion would work using this method, just how it's done. So again, with the cruel and unusual punishment, I doubt it's going to survive this in any way. But this, I would consider this worse than, a lot of the other things that we consider cruel and unusual punishment, such as Saint Corona.
Well, I mean, I'm sure that Saint Corona probably felt it, but, I mean, of course, I get your point with this is terrible. And yeah, I agree. Just closing your eyes, trying to imagine it, I can't do that for long. It'll make me tear up. Goodness. I'm at a loss for words. Well, let's read the long-term risk and adverse effects. For the woman, this procedure carries a significant immediate risk of major complications. Since the baby is removed in pieces, sharp pieces of broken fetal bones can puncture the woman's uterus or cause a large tear, laceration. This perforation or laceration in the uterus or cervix can also possibly damage the bowel, bladder, and the rectum and other maternal organs. In addition to perforation and damage to internal organs, the second trimester abortion has a greatly increased risk of excessive bleeding and hemorrhaging. This is because the placenta is tightly adherent to the lining of the womb at this stage in the pregnancy, and removing it often requires considerable scraping. The risk of excessive bleeding as a result of the abortion increases as the baby develops. The woman may also experience extreme blood loss if her uterus or cervix is injured, if the uterus does not contract properly after the procedure, or if she has an incomplete abortion. She also runs a higher risk of cervical damage, uterine perforation, and scarred tissue, which may result in future pregnancy complications, such as miscarriage and preterm birth. Uterine rupture can even lead to maternal death. Long-term damage from second trimester abortion is more frequent than for abortions in the first trimester, because the cervix has to be so widely dilated to extract the larger child. The risk of cervical damage is much greater, increasing the risk that a woman will be unable to carry a future pregnancy to term. The CDC also estimates that the risk of death increases by 38% for each additional week of gestation. There are studies, again, that indicate that the risk of depression and anxiety for a woman who carries an unwanted pregnancy to term. I remember what I was going to say. When it came to surviving these kinds of abortions, the woman that I met survived in an earlier period when abortions were first started to be done. I guess legally, I would say. And that's back when they still used the saline injection, where they would inject the child with saline and it would kill the child, the chemical would. Unfortunately, well, I don't know if unfortunately is the right word, whatever. They stopped using saline injection. I guess, fortunately, it depends on how you look at it. They stopped using the saline injections because so many survived. So I guess, unfortunately, they stopped using them because actually I would rather have them doing something that more people would survive.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So one thing to go off of with the more people surviving, I believe I brought this comment up in the last episode, but one of the biggest lessons and one of my favorite, I guess, quotes from one of my religious education teachers is that we have two goals in life. One of them is to get to heaven, and the other is to bring as many people as us as we can. And fighting for choice and fighting for life is, I guess you could consider, an obligation of being a Catholic, if you think of those two goals as being obligations.
Yeah, I would say that. You've told us that your religious teacher said that. It's a good quote, though. I like it. Nick, you have anything on this?
Nah, I just want to say I'm still in shock from the first paragraph. Like I'm still thinking about that's rough. And just how could you want to go through this? I mean, even as a mother, this is terrible. Like I don't see any good side to an abortion. This is awful.
So
and
I'll let you finish.
I do very quickly want to pull something up. I know a good statistics website that will pull up very quickly. This website has, hopefully I can pull it up. It has the statistics of how many abortions that have been done. My gosh, hold on a sec. Here we go. In the health section, it should say how many abortions have been this year. 10,116,910 and counting. And last year, there had, out of all the abortions that had ever been done in the history, there was 61 abortions ever since the law was passed. We're only in March of this year, and we have 10 million abortions that have been done.
Just watching that number goes up makes me sick.
It's insane.
So we're about the end of the third month. You can expect that number at this rate to multiply by 4. And I know personally from my Jamboree experience, 40,000 people. That was the third, like when Jamboree came to town, that was the third largest city in the state of West Virginia. That is a lot.
And it's not like that number was ticking up slowly either. It was
No, it was
regularly
like
going
second.
up. Yeah, it was like counting seconds. Okay.
So for those of you who did not catch the website title, I believe it is called World of Meters. Am I correct on that,
Sure.
Nick?
You are. Worldofmeters.info. You can check out that statistic now.
All right. Let me get my head back in the game and read. Let me read how developed the child is at this point. So, by the time that you do the DNA, the child at week 13, the preborn baby's fingerprints are visible, and the child's organs are visible through his or her thin skin. The baby is roughly 3 inches long during this stage of pregnancy. At week 16, the child's toenails begin to form, and his or her face and limbs are much more developed. The baby's heart is pumping roughly 25 quarts of blood every day, and will continue as the child develops in the womb. Many mothers feel the baby move by this point in the pregnancy. At 20 weeks, the child's nervous system is developed enough to feel pain. Research by the University of Toronto shows that babies at this stage can feel pain in the womb, even with greater intensity than adults. Almost all mothers feel the baby move at this point in the pregnancy. And at week 24, the baby is roughly a foot long, and his or her brain is developing rapidly. The child's lungs are also developing into their branch-like structure. At this age, almost all babies can survive outside of the mother if given proper support.
Okay, there are two things I'd like to point on here. The first one is at 20 weeks, with the study that shows that at this stage, babies can feel pain in the womb. And the point I want to point out here is that even with greater intensity than adults. So as you get older, I mean, I didn't get a beautiful grade in biology, but you're kind of okay, yeah, I should have failed biology. But but you kind of, your systems I guess help you to, like, if you feel a certain degree of pain, other degrees of pain don't feel as bad, I guess. So I guess the child, for that reason, feels a huge amount of pain, and that's at week 20. So gonna bring in math, which I have not failed. I don't know whether that would be a linear curve. Linear, it's not a curve. Whether it's linear, it could be exponential. Which, if you think about at week 20, they can confirm greater intensity than results. If you go to the first term, how much more would it be than adults at week 9? And if you're using, a vacuum cleaner, 10 to 20 times greater than the household one, and then multiplying it by whatever that factor is, the amount of pain is more. It cannot be considered negligible at all. So that's another thing where it's hard to visualize or think about how much that would hurt. So when you go back to those two big arguments for pro-choice life, which has already been scientifically proven wrong. So if you're basing off the facts, you have bad facts. And then you go to the pain, where the amount of pain is, I guess you could say, off the charts. In a way that I don't think it is known, but it's higher than what we would experience. And then the second thing I'd like to point out is week 24. And it says at this age, almost all babies can survive outside the mother if given proper support. Which brings me to the point of, why would you consider an abortion once you reach this stage? Like, I don't see any argument that you could give for pro-choice week 24.
Yeah, definitely. I don't see any argument you could give for any of them, but definitely not at week 24. And at any point, if a mother decides to keep the pregnancy and knows that abortion is wrong, there are Catholic families that will take in that child. I know that adoption is always a big thing, but most Catholic families would take in the child, and Catholics are a huge population.
Mm-hmm.
So, Nick, you want to read induction for the third trimester?
Okay. So, an induction abortion also is in the third trimester, and is performed at 25 weeks since the first day of the woman's last period to term. At 25 weeks, the baby is almost fully developed and is considered viable, which means that they could survive outside the womb. For this reason, the abortionist will usually kill the baby in utero by injecting a substance that causes cardiac arrest and induces the mother's labor to deliver her baby stillborn. So how is it performed? This one's even broken up into days, which is kind of horrifying. But day 1, to help ensure the baby will be delivered dead and not alive, the abortionist uses a large needle to inject digoxin or potassium chloride through the woman's abdomen or vagina, targeting the baby's heart, torso, or head. When the digoxin takes effect, the lethal dose causes fatal cardiac arrest, and the baby's life will end. Even if the needle misses the baby, digoxin can still kill the baby when released into the amniotic sac. It will usually take longer to kill the child. During the same visit, the abortionist inserts multiple laminaria sticks or sterilized seaweed to open up the woman's cervix. Already, I think that's almost as bad as the D&E abortion, I'd say. It's pretty terrible, because you're trying to get this quick done. Let's just get it over with as if it weren't a big deal, but in reality, this is a huge deal.
Yeah.
Day 2, the abortionist replaces the laminaria and may perform a second ultrasound to ensure the baby is dead. If the child is still alive, the abortionist administers a second lethal dose of digoxin or potassium chloride. During this visit, the abortionist may administer labor-inducing drugs. The woman goes back to where she is staying while her cervix continues to dilate. The woman will usually wait a period of 2 to 4 days for her cervix to dilate, enough for her to deliver the dead baby. Day 3 or 4, the woman returns to the clinic to deliver her dead baby. If she goes into labor before she can make it to the abortion clinic in time, she will deliver her baby at home or in a hotel room. During this time, a woman may be advised to sit on a bathroom toilet until the abortionist arrives. If she can make it to the clinic, she will do so during her most heavy and severe contractions and deliver the dead baby. If the child does not come out whole, the procedure becomes a D&E, or dilation and evacuation, which is what Sean has covered in the past couple minutes. The abortionist uses clamps and forceps to dismember and remove the baby piece by piece. So
Okay.
personally, I think what really shocks me is that they still allow the woman to go into labor just at home or in a hotel room. I mean, that's crazy. Delivering a dead child just at your house,
hmm
sitting on a bathroom toilet, possibly.
Okay. So I really want to talk about this one because I love how the first part of it is worded. This one was the hardest one for me to read and think about. And like I felt I started to cry. Um so that first chunk of words to help ensure the baby will be delivered dead and not alive. So you're delivering the child, but you want to make sure it's dead. And just, we're going to perform a second ultrasound to make sure they're dead. It just sounds it hurts to read. You can think about day 3 or 4 when they return to the clinic to deliver her dead baby. Think about what it must feel like once you deliver your baby alive. Think about how that feeling is, and compare it to here comes my dead baby. Think about how people who would love for people who have a miscarriage and who wanted that child. Think about how you have success, how you, at this point, you have pretty much successfully gotten past, I guess. I don't know exactly where carried the term ends, but I would think that this is the point because you are delivering the child. But you make sure that it's dead. It's as if you're going to adopt a new pet. And you have, like, you're going to get your new pet, but once you get it, you want to make sure it doesn't get home alive. Because there are other people who would love to have that pet. I guess you might not think about them too much and how much their lives could be changed by it. Because one person does not in any way, one person has a huge effect on the world around them, even if it's just in small things. I went to a Publix to get a sub, and I was happy for the dude who made my sub. He was a good guy. He had some good stories. And just, it's the little things. And I'm tearing up talking about this, but I'll let one of you guys take this real quick.
So What always makes me tear up is the D&E, not so much the induction, but I'm sure that everybody has a different one that really gets them. The pet thing is, I think, a good comparison, but think about how much more so, because it's a human person that has human dignity and is made in the image and likeness of our God. How much more valuable is that than an animal that doesn't possess a rational soul? I mean, we have essentially this stamp God on us. We are His, and we're made in His image. So it's hard to say anything. I gotta be honest. I'm kind of with Jeff on this one. Nick, do you have anything?
Not really. Hello. Okay. I guess we will go on to the next. The short-term and long-term
Yeah,
risks
that's
and adverse
probably
effects
best.
of induction abortion. I'm actually surprised these ones weren't as long. A woman faces greater risks aborting her child in the late term, given the child's size and development. Late-term abortions have a high risk of hemorrhage, lacerations, and uterine perforations, as well as a risk of maternal death. Future pregnancies are also at a greater risk or loss or premature delivery due to abortion-related trauma and injury to the cervix. There are studies that indicate the risk of depression, anxiety, and suicide is greater for a woman who aborts an unwanted pregnancy than it is for a woman who carries an unwanted pregnancy to term. I mean, this one's kind of the same as the last one's, all the side effects. I mean, if you look at them, most of them are saying the same thing. There's no good situation for the mother or the child, really.
Yeah, there really isn't. All of these adverse effects are 100%. They're pretty close in all the different trimesters, and I mean, none of them are good. All of these are really terrible. I mean, hemorrhage, lacerations, maternal death. That's terrible.
It's horrible.
One thing I'd like to point out is that the hemorrhage and lacerations, like those effects, compared to the death of the child, those you can't really compare them. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, I feel that. But, you know, we can't ignore the suffering of the mother,
Yes,
of course,
you can't.
because everyone suffers when this happens. I
Yes.
mean, in the rare occasion that you're fine with it, well, one, I
I
think you
don't know
should check
how
your
you put-
conscience and probably go to confession to kind of clear that blockage up, because clearly something's blocking it.
Mhm.
And two, this affects everybody. This affects children. This affects the mother. This affects the family, because the family suffers too.
Yeah, the family does
Kind of
really
like
suffer.
what Jeffrey said. Yeah, what Jeffrey said with the whole think about not knowing that person and the impact that they made and what they did, even if it's small. A family loses an entire member, and they just have to think about what that would have been, who they could have been, and what they could have done.
Very true. All right, I'm going to go on to how developed is the child at this point in the pregnancy? At 25 weeks, a preborn child is fully developed and considered viable, that is, with proper medical care and attention, he or she would be able to survive outside of the womb. While medical staff is required to provide life-saving care to a child who survives an abortion procedure, it is unlikely that doctors and hospitals will take intensive measures to rescue the baby if it is born alive following an abortion procedure. At 25 weeks LMP, the baby's hair continues to grow and the color and texture can be discerned. At this stage, the child is around 13.5 inches long, from the baby's head to its heels. At 27 weeks LMP, the preborn baby weighs almost 2 pounds. The child's brain tissue continues to develop, and the baby is sleeping and waking in regular cycles. The mother may even feel the child hiccup at this stage, which may become more common as the pregnancy progresses. At 31 weeks LMP, the baby can turn his or her head to the side and is very active in the womb. The baby kicks and does somersaults and develops more fat underneath the skin.
One thing I'd like to point out is in the week, I think it was 31, that last one, I read somersaults. And instantly I thought of, parkour. And it kind of, like I just pictured someone doing a flip. And for all you know, that child could be doing flips.
Don't you do that stuff, Jeffrey?
Yeah, I kind of do that stuff. I walk down holes and want to do a front flip, but I haven't quite gotten there yet.
Yeah, but like, don't you do like the ninja competitions and stuff?
I do.
That's probably why your mind went there.
Yeah. I walked down a hallway today and wanted to do a flip. Just out of the blue.
I don't really have any further comments on this section.
Me neither. So let's just go on. So we do have some good news though. So let me lighten the mood a bit, I suppose, as much as I can. When Roe v. Wade went through, the woman who was defending the right to an abortion, she was Jane Roe of Roe v. Wade. Her real name is Norma McCorvey. And Miss McCorvey later converted to Catholicism, actually. And she spent the rest of her life fighting for the pro-life cause. She wanted to fix her mistakes. And I have a quote here from her. I'm going to read it. I think it's safe to say that the entire abortion industry is based on a lie. I am dedicated to spending the rest of my life to undoing the law that bears my name. And that was from Norma McCorvey. She was the Roe of Roe v. Wade. So I thought that little redemption story might pick things up just a bit.
Honestly, it kind of hurts a little more at the effects, and all of those included the fact that depression is more likely in those who go through with abortions than those who carry to term. And she has basically dedicated her life to kind of attempt to do the best she can to fix her mistake, because you can't go back in time. It's a permanent decision. And by permanent, I mean the effect that that child could have through generations. Just think about the stories that your parents tell you about people and your grandparents tell you about people that you never knew, but hearing that story affects you in some way. It is indeed permanent.
It's kind of weird to think that, I mean, she converted to Catholicism. So think about it. we might see Miss McCorvey in heaven if we get there someday. Because it seemed like she had a very contrite heart.
If
That she was very
went to
sorrowful for her
abortion,
sin.
was truly sorry, because at some point we can kind of go over it now. There are 3 conditions for a mortal sin. So it has to be a grave matter. So the action must be seriously evil. You must have full knowledge of what you are doing and know its serious evil content. And you must have full or deliberate consent. So you must accept or consent to what you are doing. And with abortions, I think all of these at least should be met.
It should.
I think if you do go through an abortion, you have committed a mortal sin. And if you have not, because you don't have the full knowledge, I don't think so. With the grave matter, that is true for all abortions. The full or deliberate consent, I don't know of any case where that is not true. So the only one there is the full knowledge, which if you are having abortion without that full knowledge, I think something has gone wrong in the process, and that you should be able to sue legally whoever was responsible for giving you that knowledge, because I believe everyone who has had an abortion should have a mortal sin. I know that sounds wrong at first kind of hearing, but that should be the case.
They should know exactly what they're doing. Is what you mean. That should be explained to them. They should be told what they're doing. I agree with that. They're kept in the dark a lot of times, and it's unfortunate.
So, with a mortal sin, I think we should also go the you are no longer in a spirit of grace if you are if you have a mortal sin tied to you, and you cannot receive communion while in that state.
Yes,
And
you cannot receive communion.
You cannot get out of that state unless you confess it directly to a priest in confession.
And canon law might come in this part, in this particular sin. I don't know about mothers. I think mothers can definitely go to confession and receive forgiveness for it. I don't know about practitioners. I'd have to do more research into that. But of course, we're gonna put canon law down below, see what it says.
Yeah.
Because to be honest, off the top of my head, I don't even know what it says about it.
That's a thing I'd like to point out real quick is the people who work in abortion clinics and do these procedures, like they're making fries. Like, I don't know who could possibly decide that their calling is to destroy human life.
Well, maybe the punishment is the same for abortion clinic workers, because I mean, I think, I'm not exactly sure. Let me take a look real quick. But you guys, have you guys seen the movie Unplanned?
I have not.
Bits and pieces. I do know what it is about.
So, I watched the full movie for the first time in January. Okay, I am correct. I Abby Johnson is who that's based off of, her story. And she was an abortion worker. And she ran a clinic. I think it was in Houston. And she fights for the pro-life cause now. She and her husband converted to Catholicism. I believe it was back in 2012. So they're Catholic too. So clearly the church gives forgiveness in these cases. Of course, she didn't have full knowledge, so that stipulation wouldn't be met. And when she did, she left. So that as long as it's not under that category of mortal sin, you should be able to go to confession for it. I don't know what happens if it is under that category, to be honest. I'd have to do more research. But I've just watched the movie Unplanned this past January for the first time. I had heard about it. I heard it was good. I wanted to watch it, but I never got the chance. But when I watched it, it is an incredible movie. And if you haven't watched it, go watch it. Go find it online, do something, watch the movie. It is incredible. And her story is insane. And what surprised me was that in the movie, they show the child moving away from the forceps and such during a D&E abortion. And I didn't cry during that part. I didn't even cry when they showed it, the place where they kept all of the reassembled children, and they showed the reassembled children. I didn't cry at that part. I cried when they brought out the bins. You couldn't even see the pieces, just the bins of the pieces. And when the pro-life protesters outside just asked for them to stop real quick so that they could pray over the bins. When they were praying over them, that's when I started crying, which surprised me. I thought I would get got at the other parts, but that were more graphic, but I didn't. It was that emotional moment that really got me.
So I think the explanation for that is that the two more graphical focuses more on the individual being destroyed than the community that it's affecting. So
I think the movie is I think even though it's pretty graphic, I think it's graphic for a reason. Like it has to get the point across, and I think it does. I haven't seen it yet, but based on descriptions and trailers, I think it does a good job of the mission of the pro-life movement and why we fight against pro-choice. Like that's the whole purpose.
Well, as someone who's seen it, I can say it does an amazing job of portraying things. And people tried to block this movie. They gave it an R rating on purpose to try to dissuade people from going.
Mm-hmm.
This movie did not deserve an R rating. It has, I've seen things that are PG-13 with more graphic content than this movie. There's practically nothing in there. And at least nothing compared to some of the PG-13 stuff that we've all seen. So this movie was unjustly given an R rating in an attempt to block it. And that is unfortunate. Anybody who listens to this podcast, I would say if you were hung up on the rating, ignore the rating. It's stupid. Go watch the movie. It is an amazing movie. And it's just transformative, I would say.
Mm-hmm. So that's something I should put on my list of things to do, along with the natural versus death itself.
So let's darken the mood again, even worse than we did before. Rape and incest. You hear this one a lot in cases of rape and incest, and the Alabama law decided to make it illegal to do it in those cases as well. Of course, the church agrees with that, and we're in full support of that. That's a good thing. Not to mention the fact that because of that, it can get to the Capitol, and we don't know what's going to happen, but hopefully someday in the future soon, Roe v. Wade is overturned. Of course, Georgia passed a law around the same time that everybody was freaking out about. Companies were pulling their but of course, Hollywood is going to do that. Our listeners in Georgia, shout out to you guys. We like your bill. It's good. Keep it. So I have on the USCCB site, there is a doctor, a physician who deals with sexual assault victims. She's a family physician, and she was formerly a counselor for sexual assault victims. And of course, we'll put this in the description. And I'm going to read just a bit of what she said, and then I'm going to go to another thing to read. And we're going to read these in full because this is a very serious topic. And of course, the same approach to the reasoning behind rape is going to be the same for incest. So, rape victims may respond in a variety of ways on learning they are pregnant. Anger, fear, anxiety, depression, complacency, and anything else you can imagine. Family and friends often feel helpless or are uncomfortable and embarrassed. Advice such as, you have to put this behind you, and it's best not to dwell on what happened, may make recovery particularly difficult for a pregnant rape victim. Such advice does not express empathy for the victim, nor respect for the child in the event of pregnancy. The abortion solution. Abortion advocates perpetuate the myth that the pregnant rape victims generally desire abortion, and this makes it difficult for women to choose the life-giving alternative for their child. We must not forget that pregnant rape victims aren't suddenly separated from the person they were before the rape. They bring to this difficult journey their beliefs, their sense of right and wrong, and everything else that they are. In a survey I conducted with counseling agencies assisting women with problem pregnancies, therapists identified 37 women who had reported a rape-related pregnancy. Of them, 28 continued their pregnancy. 5 chose abortion, and 4 were lost to follow up. Many women in this study initially had strong negative feelings and fears. Of those who continued their pregnancy, 2/3 developed more positive feelings towards their unborn child as the pregnancy progressed. Their feelings of self-esteem and contentedness improved during the pregnancy, while anxiety, depression, anger, and fear decreased. The abortion rate among rape victims is 50% and is not substantially higher than among all women who report an unintended pregnancy, 40%. The majority of those who decided against abortion chose to raise their child, while the small percentage opted for adoption. A study of 164 such women found that the majority of those who had abortions regretted having done so and said the abortion caused them additional problems. By contrast, among those who had delivered a child conceived by rape, satisfaction was higher and none stated any regret for having given birth. Abortion, therefore, is not an inevitable choice. The loving support of family, friends, and counselors can make a huge difference. And that is by Dr. Sandra McGorn. She's a family physician and she was formerly a counselor for sexual assault victims. Before I read the ethical treatment after rape from the Catholic Education Resource Center, do you guys have anything to say on that?
Well, I guess to lighten the mood of it, I'm personally proud of those who step up and choose not to have an abortion. I was actually kind of surprised that the numbers of the of rape victims that choose to have an abortion is not actually higher, not that much higher than those who just had a normal unplanned pregnancy. I was very
Well,
surprised at that
unintended.
statistic.
I think it was unintended loss of child, so not much higher than unintended loss, I think. Let me check. Yeah, no, unintended pregnancy, you're right.
Mhm.
So an unplanned pregnancy versus rape victims, 50%. So the abortion rate is only 10% higher. That's not much.
Okay, so the big thing is, I think, that rape victims versus other um unintended pregnancies is the communities they are surrounded by. And if you're surrounded by a bunch of people who are pro-choice, they can kind of corner you into an abortion, which the same could be said with pro-life people. But I think you have to consider both options, really, because I don't know how you can look at the things we've looked at today and decide to have an abortion.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. That reminds me of the difference between being surrounded by pro-choice and pro-life individuals can change how you do things. It can make all the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And the Bible kind of speaks on this. In Proverbs 18:21, it says, "The tongue has the power of life and death." In this case, kind of literally, because
Yeah.
the support that you get from others, especially for women who have gone through rape or incest, that can make all the difference. That can be the difference between those who have an abortion and those who don't.
Mm-hmm.
So we definitely need to take care of those who have suffered this and be there for them. So I'm going to go ahead and read a statement on ethical treatment after rape. The Catechism offers a clear moral teaching. Rape is the forcible violation of the sexual intimacy of another person. It does injury to justice and charity. Rape deeply wounds the respect, freedom, and physical and moral integrity to which every person has a right. It causes grave damage that can mark the victim for life. It is always an intrinsically evil act. Graver still is the rape of children committed by parents, incest, or those responsible for the education of the children entrusted to them. And that is in 2336 in the Catechism. Note that rape is an intrinsically evil act, meaning that it is evil at its very root. Nothing justifies it, and it is objectively a mortal sin. If a woman is raped, even though she may fear exposing herself to shame and notoriety, she should seek proper medical care as soon as possible. Such care must be extremely sensitive and compassionate. In accord with the ethical and religious directives for Catholic healthcare services, number 36, the care for the rape victim has four aspects. First, she must receive spiritual and psychological support and counseling to help her deal with the trauma of the attack. Such support and counseling will probably continue for some time after the immediate period. Second, healthcare providers need to cooperate with law enforcement officials, gathering evidence that can be used in the prosecution of the rapist. Third, the victim needs treatment for bruises, cuts, and other injuries. Finally, the healthcare providers must provide treatment to prevent the possible contraction of venereal disease and pregnancy. The directives state, A woman who has been raped may defend herself against conception resulting from sexual assault. If, after appropriate testing, there is no evidence that conception has occurred already, she may be treated with medication that would prevent ovulation, sperm capacitation, or fertilization. It is not permissible, however, to initiate or to recommend treatments that have as their purpose or direct the effect the removal, destruction, or interference with the implantation of a fertilized ovum. The woman who is a victim of rape has the moral right to prevent the pregnancy for the following reasons. First, the rapist, including his sperm, is an unjust. Second, rape is an act of violence, unlike the conjugal love in marriage whereby both spouses freely give of themselves in an act of unitive and procreative love. Third, the woman is not responsible for the action and thereby has the right to prevent the pregnancy. Please note that for these three reasons, this guidance does not violate the Church's teachings regarding contraception as expressed in Humanae Vitae, which, because of the free giving between spouses, stated each and every marriage must remain open to the transmission of life. In preventing pregnancy, most rape treatment protocols recommend anti-fertility drugs to be administered within 72 hours and over a period of several days. These drugs, such as Overall, inhibit ovulation. However, some contraceptives may also affect the endometrium of the uterus, causing the expulsion of a conceived ovum. This latter effect is problematical. The real difficulty in rape treatment protocols is having moral certainty, not absolute, but the best possible good faith certainty one can have, that conception has not occurred. For once conception has occurred, the new life has a right to life and must be protected. The Second Vatican Council asserted, life must be protected with the utmost care from the moment of conception. Abortion and infanticide are abominable crimes. Subsequently, the Declaration on Procured Abortion in 1974 affirmed that life is sacred from conception and that directly intended abortion is an intrinsically evil act. From the time the ovum is fertilized, a new life has begun which is neither that of the father nor of the mother. It is rather the life of a new human being, with his own growth. It would never be made human if it were not human already. Not only does this new life have physical integrity, it also has a soul, created and infused by Almighty God. This unique human being, with both body and soul, has a right to life no matter who he is or how he was conceived, or she. For this reason, the ethical and religious directives for Catholic health facilities state, abortion, that is the directly intended termination of pregnancy before viability, is never permitted, nor is the directly intended destruction of a viable fetus. Every procedure whose sole immediate effect is the termination of pregnancy before viability is an abortion, which, in its moral context, includes the interval between conception and implantation of the embryo. Therefore, abortifacients, those drugs who would cause the expulsion of a conceived ovum, are morally wrong. Therefore, before administering contraceptives to a rape victim, healthcare providers must ascertain first her medical history, including menstrual history, recent sexual activity, and contraceptive usage. A pregnancy test should be performed. If she is not pregnant, but her medical history suggests the possibility that ovulation may have occurred, then healthcare providers ought to administer a luteinizing hormone urine dip test or a progesterone blood level test. These tests would indicate if ovulation has indeed occurred, and thereby a child was possibly conceived. If these tests are not available in a timely way or at all, treatment should proceed as long as there is a reasonable doubt that ovulation has occurred. Here again is a key point. If there is reasonable certainty that ovulation has not taken place, and there is reasonable certainty that it is not just about to occur, as would be indicated by a test showing the luteinizing hormone surge had not occurred, then one may proceed with treatment. If, on the other hand, the LH surge has been detected, the morning after pill ought not to be given, as ovulation is about to occur, is occurring, or has already just occurred. If there is certainty that ovulation has occurred and conception may have taken place, then the child has the right to life, and the mother must not risk an abortion from the anti-fertility drugs. On this latter point, some may have difficulty with the situation of a woman carrying to birth a child conceived through rape. Even though studies indicate a 0 to 2.2% occurrence of pregnancy due to rape, the fact remains pregnancies do occur. Innocent human beings of God, who did not ask to be. Also, as Christians, we bear the cross and suffer for the love of God. Consequently, a mother in such a case must love as Christ would truly love, and give life to the innocent child. For a mother who is the victim of the violence of an unjust aggressor to take the life of an innocent unborn child would make her now the unjust aggressor. As our Holy Father, Pope John Paul II, taught, whatever the reason for abortion, however serious or tragic, can never justify the deliberate killing of a human being. Instead, the faithful must support the woman who is the tragic victim, and, if she has conceived, her child. And this is by Reverend William. He works with the Arlington Catholic Herald. So Father William Saunders put this out. And I think that this is a really good one. I think that this is the correct response. And I think that that was important to read in its entirety, even though it was quite long, because this is a very serious subject and it needs serious clarification and attention.
I will say that was a lot to digest. But it does need to be said, because we have to make this clear.
I think it's good to know that there is something that can be done if it's before conception. So if she hasn't conceived yet, that it can be stopped. I think that the teaching on rape and incest is hard for a lot of people, and I think that helps mitigate it. That as a Catholic health professional, there is something that can be done if she has not yet conceived. I really like the church's response in this, and I especially like the last part where he says that the woman is the victim of an unjust aggressor, and that if she were to have an abortion, the role would be changed to where she is now the unjust aggressor and she is now committing violence against another human being because of the violence committed against her. We shouldn't allow that. It's not okay, and it's not what's best for her. So out of love for that woman, we should encourage her to keep the pregnancy until term.
Yeah, so the common saying is that two wrongs don't make a right. And that fits very well in that category. And then you can summarize a lot of that with just the basic belief of conception through natural or just death. Again, I need to kind of look at that. But it is important to discuss that in detail and to get under the surface.
And that's why I know that this was really long, but I felt that it was absolutely necessary that we read it. I think that, of course, to clarify, the church's teaching is that abortion, no matter the circumstance, is intrinsically evil. It is evil at its root, and it is not okay. It is sinful. But I think that clarification in cases of rape and incest, which are so sensitive, needed to happen. It needed to be clarified so that people know. Is that all that we have to say about this?
So I know this may sound very harsh or rude, but once you reach that conception phase and that child is a living being, there's nothing that makes a rape or incest victim different from any other.
I would clarify that if I were you. If you need me to, I can.
Yes, please clarify, because that sounds so bad coming out.
Okay. So what Jeffrey means is morally, of course, the situation is different. Yes. The woman who has been unjustly attacked and victimized, which needs our compassion, of course, and support. Her situation is different from a typically just unintended or unwanted pregnancy. And that's why it does take a considerable amount more of compassion and gentleness, because it's so much more difficult of a situation and it's so much more scarring, and it changes not only the woman's life but those around her too. And so her situation is different, yes, but the fact still remains that is not different, that she still has a child that has been conceived that has a right to life, and in that manner she's the same. And so the same exact standard has to be applied. It's the only ethical standard to have and apply, and it's the only consistent standard for us to apply.
Yes. That clarification definitely needed.
So
So
your hard-hitting words. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
okay, so I feel like the fact that there is a higher percentage for rape victims is partially our fault. As
What do you mean higher percentage?
the 50 versus 40 percentage
Oh,
unintended versus rape. I feel
yeah, it's
that
not much, but
it depends on how you look at it. If you think of the percentage increase, it's a 25% increase from 40 to 50. If you look at it as an
25?
overall, it's
From 40 to
only
50?
10.
Yeah, that would be 10%.
25% of 40 is 10, which you're adding there.
All right.
I guess if you look at it that way, it seems a little larger.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's kind of our fault as a community. Like, we are the ones at fault for that higher percentage. Because if they are surrounded with a gentle community, and gentleness is again one of the fruits of the Holy Spirit, I feel like there shouldn't be an increase in percentage. But I
So
don't.
you think that the church should be doing more, that we should be speaking about this more and going out and making it known that we're here for them and that they can come to us for comfort and we'll take care of them. And we really should. We should be opening programs and systems, entire systems, to be taking care of these women so that they don't have to worry about things, because they shouldn't need to.
I think it's the individual level that's lacking more. Just the one-on-one, who can I talk to?
Okay.
I feel like because I feel like if you talk to someone who was in the same scenario as you and who decided to go through with it, and it was the best thing that ever happened to them. I feel like if you had a one-on-one conversation with them, it would definitely change your decision to have an abortion.
Yeah, so you think that individual Catholics should be doing more too, which I agree with. I think that the church as a whole should do more, and that individual Catholics should also do more. Your point of view reminded me of, I don't remember which pope it's a quote from, but the quote is, "All the evil in the world is a result of lukewarm Catholics." And that's a hard hitter.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think about it, us as Catholics, we have the entirety of truth. We have the fullness of the truth. And so if we choose that, then the evil that happens as a result, it's like people say, evil things happen because good men sit by and watch. They don't do anything.
Yeah. That's another thing that I think about often, is just who you are surrounded by greatly affects who you become. And there is a huge difference in outcome with a positive and negative environment.
Nick, you got anything?
I had something at the top of my head. I'm trying to bring it back. I don't know. I forgot, I think.
All right. Well,
If it comes back,
speaking of, yeah, if it comes back, just bring it up. Speaking of the harsh words that Jeffrey had.
Oh, I remember it.
Oh, go ahead.
All right, so I think that we have as Catholics an obligation. We have obligations for a lot of things as Catholics, but I think especially to take this obligation really seriously. I mean, as we've portrayed to all the listeners and people who are watching, this is a serious issue, and I think it really needs to be taken care of. Like Sean and Jeffrey elaborated on, that the evil in the world comes about because good people, they just don't care. They don't do anything. So I think it's a good person's duty to stand up for those that can't really stand up for themselves at all.
And I think that us as men particularly have a responsibility for this. You know, if you see something like this happening, do something. I mean, not to be harsh, but I would judge that you failed as a man in your duties if you did nothing. It's just dishonorable, I would say, which I know that honor is kind of an outdated thing, but it's dishonorable to not do anything. Man up, protect the woman. If you see something like this happening, stop it. And if you're not around to stop it in the aftermath, comfort her, be there for a woman who's gone through this. If you know any girls who have gone through this, be there for them, talk to them, show them that you love them and that you care and that you're willing to help them through this, and do all that you can. And try to help them make the right decision. So, our last thing is what the early church taught about this. And at the beginning, we read that thing in the catechism where it said that the early church has always affirmed this. And they surely did. Now, the early church fathers, of course, were all Catholic. You can read through them, and they are obviously Catholic. But their words, oftentimes when I read through them, they're so harsh. Like, they're so hard-hitting. They don't hold anything back, which is why I was saying, compared to Jeffrey's hard words, his are nothing compared to the early church fathers. Like, these guys were hard hitters. They did not care. Political correctness was not a thing. So let's go read some of their stuff. See how
Fun.
much trouble we can get in. Uh, so Athenagoras, in A Plea for Christians 35, in the year AD 177, said, "What man of sound mind, therefore, will affirm, while such is our character, that we are murderers? When we say that those women who use drugs to bring on abortion commit murder, and will have to give an account to God for the abortion, on what principle should we commit murder? For it does not belong to the same person to regard the very fetus in the womb as a created being, and therefore an object of God's care, and when it has passed into life, to kill it, and not to expose an infant, because those who expose them are chargeable with child murder. And on the other hand, when it so for those that don't know, even back in Roman times, they had abortions. And this often happened if it was a girl rather than a boy. There is an account of a soldier who was off on, I guess you'd say, deployed, and he was writing back to his wife, and he says that if it's a boy, let him know, good fortune. If it's a girl, expose it. And expose it is a nice little euphemism, like we say fetus or other things like that, to try and mitigate the idea that it's a child. Expose it simply means kill it. And the early Christians in Rome, they would take their unwanted children and they would toss them off of the bridge and down below, where a wild animal would often come up and, kill the child or whatever if the child survived the fall, etc. Well, back in the day when Christianity was just starting up in Rome and Roman society, when people would do this, in the darkness waiting below, we have accounts of this, the Christians would be waiting, and they would take the children into their homes and raise them as their own. And over time, this won over the hearts of many in Rome, this testament. And I think that nowadays we're called to do the same thing, that if there's a child that has survived an abortion, or children period, that are without homes, we need to be adopting these children. Certain things might keep you from adopting, financial things like that, but if there's nothing in particular keeping someone from adopting, they should try to do it, because that is a testimony that speaks to a lot of people. Next is Tertullian, and I'm going to read from Apology 98 AD 197. In our case, a murder being once for all forbidden, we may not destroy even the fetus in the womb, while as yet the human being derives blood from the other parts of the body for its sustenance. To hinder a birth is merely a speedier man-killing, nor does it matter whether you take away a life that is born or destroy one that is coming to birth. That is a man which is going to be one. You have the fruit already in its seed. Again, Tertullian, The Soul 25, the year AD 210. Among surgeons' tools there is a certain instrument, which is formed with a nicely adjusted flexible frame for opening the uterus first of all and keeping it open. It is further furnished with an annular blade, by means of which the limbs of the child within the womb are dissected with anxious but unfaltering care, its last appendage being a blunted or covered hook, wherewith the entire fetus is extracted by a violent delivery. There is also another instrument in the shape of a copper needle or spike, by which the actual death is managed in this furtive robbery of life. They give it, from its infanticide function, the name of embruasfactes, meaning the slayer of the infant, which of course was alive. The doctors who performed the abortions all knew well enough that a living being had been conceived, and they pitied this most luckless infant state, which had first to be put to death to escape being tortured alive. And now we allow that life begins at conception because we contend that the soul also begins from conception, life taking its commencement at the same moment and place that the soul does. The law of Moses indeed punishes with due penalties the man who shall cause abortion. Do you guys have anything to say about that one?
Not really, although I do want to throw in a little side note that even before the early church, even before Christianity, in the Old Testament, I think I'm not sure if Genesis, probably, I think more Exodus, that,
Would have been the law of Moses, which I think is contained in Deuteronomy. A lot of the law is contained in Deuteronomy.
well, I remember that Moses he got upset at some of the Jews because they were offering child sacrifices, newborn child sacrifices, they didn't want to the demon Moloch, which they carved a giant stone statues, a demon with horns with a fire burning in the pit of its stomach, and they would toss their unwanted children in its stomach, almost as a sacrifice, and they almost worshipped like this demon. And I thought that
Oh, they did.
correlated sharply.
It wasn't Moses, but yeah, that was in the Old Testament, the demon Moloch. And what you're saying is exactly right. What would happen was it was a giant, I think, bronze statue for Moloch, who was a pagan god. And of course, we know that the pagan gods were just demons. That's what St. Paul tells us. So it was a giant bronze brazen statue, and they would light a fire in its belly. And then, of course, there would be great hypnotic music and dancing and celebration and lots of drinking and feasting. And then they would say how much of a privilege it was for you to sacrifice your child so that the harvest would be plentiful this year. And they would take the child, and then they would probably say something along the lines of, Moloch, we've given you our best, now you give us your best. And then they would roll the child into the mouth, where it would fall into the stomach and burn to death. So yes, that was some of the pagan worship that the Jews unfortunately fell into during the Old Testament. So next, Hippolytus' refutation of all heresies. The year is AD 228. Women who were reputed to be believers began to take drugs to render themselves sterile, and to bind themselves tightly so as to expel what was being conceived, since they would not, on account of relatives and excess wealth, want to have a child by a slave or by any insignificant person. See, then, into what great impiety that lawless one has proceeded, by teaching adultery and murder at the same time. So next, the Council of Ancyra, or Ancyra. This is a church council, and it took place in the year AD 314. I think it can be found quoted in Canon 21. And it says, concerning women who commit fornication and destroy that which they have conceived, or who are employed in making drugs for abortion, a former decree excluded them until the hour of death. And to this some have assented. Nevertheless, being desirous to use somewhat greater leniency, we have ordained that they fulfill 10 years of penance according to the prescribed degrees. So that was them trying to be nice, and they still cite 10 years of penance as the consequence instead of being excommunicated, or how they would say back in the day, anathema. Because back in the day, you would be anathema until the hour of death. You just wouldn't be in communion with the church anymore. And some were complaining about that. So they decided to be lenient, and they gave 10 years of penance, which is, it speaks a lot to say that that is their definition of leniency
Yeah.
of how serious this is. 10
Yeah.
years of penance is a long time. So, and Basil the Great spoke on that in the year AD 374 in his first canonical letter. Let her that procures abortion undergo 10 years penance, whether the embryo were perfectly formed or not. So, one of the last ones is St. John Chrysostom. And of course, St. John Chrysostom is awesome. So, let's see what he has to say in Homilies to Romans 24. This was the year AD 391. He says, wherefore I beseech you, flee fornication. Why so where the ground makes it its care to destroy the fruit? Where there where there is, for even the harlot you do not let continue a mere harlot, but make her a murderess also. You see how drunkenness leads to prostitution, prostitution to adultery, adultery to murder, or rather to something even worse than murder, for I have no name to give it, since it does not take off the thing born, but prevents it being born. Why then do thou abuse the gift of God, and fight with his laws, and follow after what is a curse as if a blessing, and make the chamber of procreation a chamber for murder, and arm the woman that was given for childbearing unto slaughter? For with a view to drawing more money by being agreeable and an object of longing to her lovers, even she is not backward to do, so heaping upon thy head a great pile of fire. For even if the daring deed be hers, yet the causing of it is thine. And I think he was kind of getting on the guys for a second there of, hey, you should be standing up for this. And you shouldn't make the mistake in the first case to have sex out of wedlock. 2, if you do make that mistake, you need to be standing up for your child. You can't allow this to happen. Do everything in your power to keep it from happening. And so I think that's a very valuable piece of wisdom from St. John Chrysostom.
So the big takeaway I got from this was earlier I said that murder was 100% the word to use, and I'm going to scrap that because I completely agree with what he said here, because it's not ending a life, really. Well, it is ending a life.
Yeah, it's not.
But it's
ending
also
a birth. It's preventing it. Yeah, it's preventing that life.
Because the average life expectancy is what, 67?
Maybe.
Depends on where you live.
And you're killing it weeks in. That's a lot of preventing.
Yeah. So last, I'm going to say just a little piece from the Didache. The Didache was kind of like the handbook of how to do things or what you should do for a Christian in the early church. So it's a very valuable piece of information for us to reference, a very valuable book. If you haven't read it or you haven't read the Church Fathers, go read the Church Fathers and go read the Didache. All of it is just incredible. And you'll see how staunchly Catholic the Church has always been. So this is the Didache 2, sections 1 and 2. And this was in the year AD 70. So this is only 7. So Christ died AD 33. And this is AD 70. This isn't that long after. The apostles might even still be alive, probably. So it says, the second commandment of the teaching, you shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not seduce boys. You shall not commit fornication. You shall not steal. You shall not practice magic. You shall not use potions. You shall not procure an abortion nor destroy a newborn child. And the only reason why I really read that was because of the fact that the Didache was kind of like a early catechism in a way. It told the priests how to do things in their churches and how to do the rites and sacraments and things like that and blessings, but it also told basically how you should go about things and what the teachings were, etc.
The do's and what not to do.
Yeah, pretty much. So, as we can see, the church fathers speak pretty harshly on this. You know, a murderess, it's worse than murder, preventing a birth, all these different things. You know, church fathers never held their tongue, which is something awesome about them when you go read them. I mean, at times I read them and I go, ugh, that's a bit harsh. I don't know if I would have worded it that way. That might turn some people away, but I guess that we've just been conditioned to be a bit softer than they were. Probably
Yeah.
a lot softer. We should probably try to get back to their way of thinking where they just kind of thought, you know, this is how it is. This is what needs to be said. They need to understand what we're dealing with here.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the early church. Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
The biggest thing I got from there was the tossing babies off of bridges, really. And I kind of just thought of it as adoption. The Catholics grabbing them.
Yeah, and there are lots of records of that. I didn't read that off of any quotes or anything, but I have read the records and stuff on that, and I think that we're all called to imitate that. I think that we need to start studying how the early Christians did things a lot more in depth. We need to understand them because this is a lot closer to how we need to be evangelizing nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
So, Nick, you have anything?
I like how I do like how they stand up very harshly against abortion and all the topics related to that. I think it's a good stance. There's a lot of stances you could take against the pro-choice argument, but for sure that the early church fathers, they really make it to the point. Like he said, this is what it's supposed to be. Why make any case for argument? It's the truth. This is how you're supposed to live. This is right.
Yeah, and we have the Didache as early as AD 70. That's like, I'm bad at math. Jeffrey, how
What?
far apart is AD 33 and AD 70?
80-33 and 80-70, like the difference between those?
Yeah,
Because that's like a 37-year difference. But like,
that's
Is
only
that
37 years.
is that BC or AD?
No, AD. 33 AD to 70 AD.
Like, are you asking like 70 minus 33 or like 2019 minus 37?
No. 70 minus 33. Yeah.
That's 37.
Yeah, so only 37 years. And we already have Christian writing saying for the whole church that abortion is not okay. And you heard all the other things that are included in there, you know, stealing, adultery, sleeping with boys, magic, potions. All of this stuff is already established in just 37 years, including abortion. So nobody can ever argue that the church never taught that. And so when the catechism says that the church has always held this position, it definitely means it, because the apostles weren't even dead at that point. The apostles were still going around. St. Paul was probably still going around. So, yeah, I really enjoyed the St. John Chrysostom quote. I think that he's kind of appealing to what I said with the whole honor thing of, you know, one, don't have fornication outside of marriage. Don't commit adultery or fornication. Two, if you make that mistake, then defend your child's right to life. It's your kid. And I hold the same stance that I do intervention when it comes to rape than I do this circumstance. If the guy doesn't stand up for his child's right to life, it's dishonorable. Do it. Man up. Stand up for your child. If you made that mistake, fine. Repent of it and make it right. So that's the entirety of the show. We're going to close out in prayer. I'm going to lead us in an Ave Maria because we know that the devil hates Latin. So anything to make him hurt because we don't like him. So, ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, et in hora mortis nos, nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
And that is the end of episode 2. So, all you guys check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Don't forget our YouTube channel, Saints of the New Millennium. Look us up, subscribe, follow us. So, we'll see you guys next time.